So while Dune Awakening is seeming to be a pretty massive game on release, it's also going to be a live service game, meaning it's going to constantly be getting updates. Seemingly pretty consistent smaller updates and then some bigger updates down the road where we will even see things like going to the polar ice caps of Arrakis, and some point later in the future we will also be going to other planets in the Dune universe. Now, a very important part of live service games is their model of monetization, and Dune Awakenings is a bit unique compared to the rest of the gaming industry, but it's also something we don't have all of the information on. But we do get a look at the first 4 DLCs coming to Dune Awakening, and DLCs being one of the main ways in which they're going to be monetizing the game. And that's the main thing I wanted to go over in this video, and the possibilities with these DLCs, because we still don't know exactly how this is going to work. Now, before we get into the content of the DLCs and what we could expect for future updates, we have to go over the monetization of Dune Awakening. Now, Dune Awakening is going to be launching on May 20th, and it is going to be only launching on PC at the start. Somewhere down the road, it will also be launching on consoles. It is not an early access game, even though you will be able to purchase one of the bigger editions of the game on launch. You get 5 days of head start, basically, but there will also be fresh servers after those 5 days. So if you don't get a bigger version of the game, you will still be able to go on a fresh server that doesn't have people that have already been playing for 5 days. Now, Dune Awakening will have a starting price of $49.99. That's for the base game. It does come with some additional things if you pre-order, primarily some additional cosmetics. And the deluxe is $69.99. The ultimate is $89.99. Pretty much everything you're getting in those additional versions is a bunch of cosmetics. But on top of that, and something that's pretty important, is with any of the more expensive versions, you will also be getting the season pass. Now, like I mentioned, DLCs will be one of the main ways in which Dune Awakening continues to monetize itself. Now, for DLCs, you'll be able to purchase them one at a time. So if you just want to purchase one and not the other, you can do that, or you'll be able to buy the season pass. The season pass will have the first 4 DLCs in it, pretty similar to a lot of other games that are maybe more co-op or single player focused. I wasn't able to find the exact price of the season pass by itself or the DLCs by themselves, but you can also get them in the bigger versions of the game, and they will presumably be cheaper when buying those initial more expensive versions of the game than buying the season pass down the road or buying DLCs one at a time. And it does also seem like there will be a cosmetic shop, because pretty much all of these DLCs will also have cosmetics in them. And I very much doubt that Dune Awakening is not going to have a cosmetic shop where you can buy tons of different cosmetics, where you can buy the different dyes to put on different vehicles or armor or weapons or anything like that, or even buying different cosmetic packs that change up how your buildings look. There will almost certainly be a cosmetic shop on top of the DLCs and on top of the base price. Now, one of the big things they did announce is that pretty much all of the content, or the majority of the content of this live service game, will be free. We do know there's going to be some amount of content in some of these DLCs. Right now, it seems like it's limited more to some kind of story-based quest, but we don't know the complete extent of it. But it seems that most of the content, and presumably most of the bigger content as well, will be free. So all of this monetization is built to support all of that free content, to presumably try to keep everybody on the same playing field generally when it comes to any of the content that would affect actual gameplay or PvP. But that brings us to the 4 DLCs that we have small descriptions of. And I also want to go over a bit of what we can expect past this, because one of these DLCs also gives us a bit of a look into one of the bigger updates that will be coming in the somewhat near future to Dune Awakening. So the first DLC is Wildlife of Arrakis. This will be coming with the launch of Dune Awakening, and this is described as a cosmetic DLC. Decorate your base with statues of prominent wildlife of Arrakis, including Shai Hulud himself. So the big sandworm, these are just some cosmetic statues you can put in your base. This seems to be one of the main things of these DLCs. They are primarily cosmetic focused. So even though some of them are seeming to have a small amount of content in them, it does seem they are very focused on being cosmetically driven. So it's kind of like you're just buying a big pack of cosmetics instead of just buying like one thing at a time from a cosmetic shop. And the second DLC is Lost Harvest. This will be coming October to December 2025. So we'll be getting a second DLC in 2025. And this is described as a side story and cosmetics. And again, this is one of the main things that I think they're also doing with the DLCs, is that they're going to have side stories seemingly focus on just story of the world. I would assume that they're not going to be giving you anything crazy. Even if they give you you some amount of like weapons or some type of resource rewards for these quests. How Dune Awakening works and how most survival games work is that they really couldn't give you anything that would make a massive impact a lot of the time, because if they gave you the super strong weapon, you could potentially go lose it pretty easily. If they give you a bunch of resources, well, you could pretty much just go infinitely farm those. So it does primarily seem to be like side quests and story-based stuff, but this is described as a stranded harvester, a desperate crew, a secret that has been buried for over 10,000 years, and the image does seem to show an interesting looking crashed ship. And I would not be surprised if with these DLCs that also have side stories in them, if you would have to go do that side story to get the cosmetics as a reward for following that quest chain or something like that, that wouldn't surprise me very much. Then the third DLC is Raiders of the Broken Lands, coming January to March of 2026. This is described only as cosmetics. The Broken Lands are shattered plains of broken rock known for their fearsome raiders. Now, the first thing I think of this is probably going to be like a big cosmetic pack focused around this more raider aesthetic. So I could see like getting an armor set, a bunch of different weapon cosmetics, a bunch of dyes for ships that kind of feel more like raider ships or raider vehicles, and then probably a full building cosmetic set to make your buildings look much more like how raiders would be creating their buildings. And I do have to say, if these DLCs are primarily just focused on cool cosmetic packs that give you a bunch of cosmetics that kind of fit the same theme, I think that's generally one of the best ways you can monetize a live service game. Give you cosmetics, doing it in a bit of a different way and kind of having a big clump of cosmetics that all fit a theme, I definitely think could work pretty well, because they're probably going to be giving you better prices than you would get from a normal cosmetic shop of any live service game. The final DLC we have is Water Wars. This one throws a wrench into how the other DLCs are working. This is coming April to June of 2026, and this doesn't have a description. It doesn't tell us if it's cosmetics or a quest or anything like that. It just says, water is life. The water shipper families are at war, fighting for control of the polar caps of Arrakis. Now, I could still see this being only a cosmetic DLC, and it's built around these water shipper families, however they build all of their buildings. Like, since we are going to the polar ice cap, maybe they have completely different buildings because they serve completely different purposes than being in the deserts. So it could be that you're buying this big cosmetic pack to look like these people that are in the polar ice caps. But the very interesting thing about this is that one of the first big additions coming to Dune Awakening that the developers have talked about before is going to the polar ice caps, because it allows the developers to switch up the environment of what we're getting. Dune Awakening is obviously going to be pretty heavily focused on Arrakis and specifically on launch, so it's primarily going to be desert. They're doing a bunch of stuff to try to switch that up, to try to make things feel a bit different, but at the end of the day, when you're in a desert, you're in a desert. Being able to stay on Arrakis and go to polar ice caps, which are very different from the desert, allows them to just add a different map you can travel to and have a completely different feel, a completely different environment, probably new survival mechanics. I would be very surprised if we go to the polar ice caps and heat or temperature is not something we have to survive, because even in the base of Dune Awakening, you have to survive heat of the desert, so it would make sense you have to survive the cold of the polar caps, and it would make sense to get a really cool cosmetic DLC that gives you all of these different polar inspired buildings. But this does also give us a glimpse of kind of a time period we could expect for the polar ice cap updates to come. April to June is when we get the DLC. I would presume that's when we'd be getting the polar caps update, and I very much do not think that you will have to get this DLC to go to the polar caps. I think that big update to go to the polar caps to get these new big zones or areas in the game, I suspect that those are all going to be part of the free content, because I don't think they want you having to purchase this content that would take you to a different map that would probably have some different type of resources and different type of mechanics. Being able to go to this new area that's only paid and then say take different items or take new crafted things that require those new resources and going back to the different areas like the deep desert Haga Basin, wouldn't it really work very well in a survival MMO like this? Because they could add something in one of those big updates if it was paid that would just end up being really good, and now you basically have a pay to win scenario. So I do think the polar caps update is going to be free, but this DLC is going to be focused around it, probably focused around DLC and maybe a quest line focused around kind of one of the new factions we would meet in this new update. Now, one of the big reasons I want to talk about these DLCs and the future possible content for Dune Awakening again, because I have talked about some of this in previous videos, is because that's one of the things that really interests me about live service games, is this continuously evolving world, constantly constantly adding on top of it, and especially as such a renowned IP and interesting universe as Dune, there's so many areas they could take this, especially with these small kind of lore changes they've made to make Dune fit better into a survival MMO. Now, we're obviously going to be getting tons of new content that's just kind of adding similar things we already have in the game. Like, we could probably expect new weapons, new vehicles, new resources, new dungeons, all those type of things that are things we already have, that are built in systems we already have, that they could just add more content of that system into the game. We could probably expect that on a decently regular basis. The thing that interests me a bit more are these much bigger possible updates. We talked about going to the polar caps, which is a really good first look into very big possibilities for the future of Dune Awakening, because as I mentioned, going to these very different environments means they're going to have to add new survival mechanics. Because starting off in Dune Awakening, you're going to have to really care about your water, you're going to really have to care about your temperature, specifically not getting overheated, and those are things kind of specific to a desert. Now, if you go to the polar caps, there may be a lot more water there, maybe much more readily available, depending on exactly how they do it. But then you also don't have the heat, you have the complete opposite, potentially extreme cold. So they could just kind of invert the base mechanic they have of heat, and now you have to worry about cold, meaning you're probably going to want maybe different clothing, different armor, and there may be other mechanics you have to focus on to be able to survive in a very different, but still a very dangerous environment. And it gets even crazier when you go to other planets in the Dune universe, because the developers have not only talked about wanting to go to the polar caps in a future update, but they've also said that once Arrakis has been explored, they want to take the game to other planets in the Dune universe. And some of them are so incredibly interesting, especially when compared directly to Arrakis, because some of them are almost the complete opposites. Like, we could go to Caladan, which is the home of the Atreides, and Caladan is a lush oceanic world, meaning we're going from Dune, basically has no water. The main survival mechanic is finding water, then going to Caladan where there's water, or at least there's oceans everywhere, but it'd definitely be much easier to get water, even if you had to like filter ocean water or something like that. But that would also force the developers to add a bunch of new survival mechanic. If you go from Arrakis to Caladan, you now don't have to worry about water in the same way, so they would need probably a new mechanic for that. Because it's kind of this lush, more temperate world, you probably wouldn't have to worry as much about extreme temperatures. They may add different regions of that planet that may have more extreme temperatures, but they may not even do a temperature system you have to worry much about on Caladan. They may just want to add completely different survival mechanics. And obviously, going to these different worlds, there would probably be very different resources, especially the main currency. Now, I know spice is still kind of the main currency of the entirety of the Dune universe. If we were going to another planet that you obviously can't get spice on, there would probably be another currency that would kind of be used more so on that planet and more so by the people that just stay and live on Caladan that aren't people that'd be able to travel from Arrakis. So that could mean a completely different main currency. It'd probably be more of a secondary currency, and spice would still be the main one. That could also be very interesting as well. And then you have something like Gedi Prime, which is the home of the Harkonnen, which is the other faction that we get at the start of Dune Awakening. So it would kind of make sense that we get both of those planets, maybe before we get anything else. But Gedi Prime, their homeworld, is completely different than both of the other planets we just talked about. It's this kind of super brutal world, which is kind of explained to just be completely taken over by heavy industrialization, which then just causes massive amounts of pollution, which would probably be one of the main survival mechanics if we went to Gedi Prime. Completely industrialized planet where we would have to worry about how much pollution we're taking in. Almost makes me think about kind of like the Geiger counter and radiation from something like Fallout. You could definitely do something like that, and I think it would actually work pretty well for Gedi Prime. But then you also have something like low light levels on Gedi Prime. So the planet is kind of in darkness. They kind of showed this in a bit of a different way in the second of the newest Dune movies. Having this super industrialized world world with a lot of pollution that's super dark most of the time, those could be two other gameplay mechanics that you would have to survive around. And I do think that's actually one of the most interesting parts of going to those other planets, is legitimately just having completely different survival mechanics. A lot of other survival games don't completely change up their main survival mechanics depending on when they're going into new pieces of content. They'll usually add something different, maybe remove a mechanic that doesn't fit in the new area they're going, but completely changing up your survival elements is something that Dune Awakening would probably have to do on some of these planets, and something that would just be incredibly interesting. And then on top of that, you just have the Dune universe being so incredibly interesting, all of these other planets also being super interesting, especially something like Gady Prime, which is just so kind of alien and outlandish. Going to Caladan would probably feel something similar to Earth, or something similar you'd be more used to a real human living on Earth, but going to something like Gady Prime would be just completely different and alien, so that could definitely make it much more interesting as well. So all in all, if Dune Awakening continues to be successful for years in the future, I'm extremely excited to see what new mechanics and content we get, being able to go to the different planets of the Dune universe. And it seems like a lot of the people working on the game at Funcom are big fans of the Dune universe, so it very much seems like this is something that they would always be wanting to do. They would want to be going to these other super interesting planets and seeing what types of new mechanics they could add into it, and it would just be really interesting and cool to be able to visit those other planets of such a renowned universe. But that's pretty much all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.